Sponsored by the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation. Channel 1. Star Media. Babich Design. Oryol Governorate Prison, Oryol, Russian Empire, 1914. Here, the biggest penal colonies of Tsarist Russia, a revolutionary is being held captive, who is destined to become famous all over the world. All in all, he'll spend 11 years incarcerated, and he will dedicate his entire life to the cause. He is still yet to become a legend of state security. But even in his first letters to his family, his iron will is displayed. Felix Dzerzhinsky. Decades later, they will call him the Knight of the Revolution and the Apostle of Terror. He will be remembered as Iron Felix, and his deeds will be the subject of heated discussions for many years to come. But even the staunchest opponents of Dzerzhinsky agree that he was a truly remarkable person. Land of the Soviets, forgotten leaders, Felix Dzerzhinsky. Felix means happy in Latin. That's what the Dzerzhinskys decided to call their son after his mother started giving birth prematurely. But the boy was born healthy despite the circumstances. The Dzerzhinsky family was an old Polish nobility line, but they weren't rich. They lived close to Vilnius, in the Dzerzhinovo village. Like many other Poles, the Dzerzhinskys didn't consider themselves subject of the Russian Tsar. In fact, they only spoke Polish at home, and every Sunday they would go to Mass to a Catholic church, and they all dreamed together of their homeland's independence in secret.
Polish Kingdom. At the start of the 19th century, the Polish Kingdom was added to the Russian Empire. After the suppression of the 1863 uprising, there was a campaign of Russification of the population. Polish was banned from use at schools, in public places, in official correspondence. The ban included religious books in Polish, and nobles and Catholics were being forced out of governmental institutions.
At the age of 10, Felix enrolled into the first Vilnius gymnasium. The privileged school was famous for its strict rules, and it counted the Russian Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin and the famous artist Vasily Kachalov among its alumni. Felix was forced to repeat the first grade. He spoke Russian badly and would talk back to his teachers. Oftentimes, he would spend all day in the disciplinary cell instead of the classroom. He was only interested in one class, scripture knowledge. Dzerzhinsky's memoirs. I was very religious. I was even going to go to the Roman Catholic seminary, but that never happened. When I was in the 6th grade, a sudden change took place. I spent an entire year thinking about how there was no God, and I made sure to tell everybody about it. There are many legends surrounding who Iron Felix was as a person, and according to one of them, it was a freak accident that shook the faith in the young man's soul. Felix and his brother Stanislav were target practicing with their father's rifle, and they accidentally shot their own sister, who died on the spot. According to a different version, Dzerzhinsky was disillusioned with God's existence for a different reason. One of his gymnasium friends had given him the works of Karl Marx.
Karl Marx, German philosopher, economist, the founder of Marxism, a theory of a just society where all the ruling classes and private property are destroyed, all members of society are equal, granted equal rights and opportunities. Marx's ideas resonated with social democrats the world over.
Felix really did trade his faith in God to faith in Marxism, but he never stopped being idealistic. Having gotten a passion for revolutionary ideas, Dzerzhinsky joined the Lithuanian Social Democratic Party and dropped out of the gymnasium. In his Kaunas apartment, a copying machine called a hectograph began to operate. Using this underground typography, Dzerzhinsky would print propaganda leaflets and a newspaper called The Kaunas Worker, encouraging the workers to fight for their rights. On July 17, 1897, Felix was walking, hiding a batch of fresh leaflets on him. He was planning to secretly hand them over to his friend for him to pass around in the factory. He was awaiting Dzerzhinsky at a park bench, but as soon as Felix handed the young man the leaflets, the police ran up to him. The friend turned out to be a secret police informant. The gendarmes tried to make Dzerzhinsky give up all of his revolutionary connections. They demanded a heartfelt confession. They deprived him of food and beat him with birch sticks. But he kept silent and never gave any statement about any of his comrades. Preliminary incarceration lasted for around a year. In a note to his sister from the Kaunas prison, Felix adamantly rejects her pitiful tone. "You call me a poor soul, and you are greatly mistaken. I can say with conviction that I am much happier than those who lead pointless lives in freedom. And if I had to choose between prison and a pointless life outside, I would choose the former. There would be no reason in existing otherwise. So even though I am in prison, I do not feel down. Prison is only horrible for the weak of heart." Dzerzhinsky was convicted to 3 years of exile in the city of Nolinsk in the Vyatka Governorate for distribution of illegal literature. That's where he met Margarita Nikolaeva, and the girl was in exile too. On Wednesdays, she would hold Marxist club meetings at her home. The two young people started to hold correspondence. The exiled had to regularly check in at the local police department. The procedure was formal, and usually the record clerk at the station would do it. But one day, Dzerzhinsky was asked to see the police captain himself. The local police department head demanded that Felix stop the propaganda among the workers, and then started flirting with Margarita. The young man couldn't hold back his temper and called the captain a bastard and a scumbag. For insulting a government functionary, Dzerzhinsky was exiled 500 versts east of Nolinsk to the village of Kaigorodskoye in Slobodsky Uyezd. From time to time, Dzerzhinsky would go to the woods for a few days to fish and hunt, and the local police quickly got used to these long absences. That's what started an escape plan. One time, the young revolutionary never returned to the village. The policeman only announced the alarm on day 7, sending out telegrams about an exiled person running away. But it was too late. Felix had already reached the nearest train station by boat. From there, he went to Vyatka, and in the same year of 1899, he reached Warsaw. Later, exiled yet again, Dzerzhinsky would write Margarita, "By rights, we should not correspond at all, for it will only aggravate both you and myself. I am a rogue, and making friends with a rogue spells grief for you. I beg you, do not write me at all." And so Dzerzhinsky's illegal life started. At daytime, he would hide in safe houses, write leaflets and articles. He would only go out into the streets at night to speak in front of the workers. When Dzerzhinsky was put in charge of the secret police, his experience with illegal work would come in handy for finding and arresting criminals. Soon, he was arrested again. He spent 2 years in prison, and then later, in 1902, he was exiled for 5 years. This time to Siberia. A life like that was bound to affect his health. Felix was taken ill with tuberculosis. In 1905, after escaping exile yet again, Dzerzhinsky returns to Warsaw, into the very thick of it. He kept doing revolutionary work, organizing strikes and protests for Polish workers, heading the Warsaw Party Conference. In Warsaw, he was arrested again, but amnestied in just 3 months. Before his next incarceration, Felix managed to meet Vladimir Lenin. Their meeting took place in Stockholm at the 4th Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. At the same time, Dzerzhinsky met his true love, Warsaw, Polish Kingdom, Russian Empire, 1905. Her name was Sofia Muscat. The future wife of Felix Dzerzhinsky was born in a rich Jewish family. She received a brilliant education, graduated from the Warsaw Conservatory specializing in piano, but when she joined the ranks of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, she started living the life her beloved had already gotten used to: arrests, prisons, exiles, and escapes. In early 1908, for illegal activity and escaping prison, Felix Dzerzhinsky is arrested once again and then exiled to Siberia permanently. The revolutionary's health kept getting worse as tuberculosis progressed, but even that fact didn't keep him from escaping yet again. In 1910, Felix Dzerzhinsky and Sofia Muscat got married, and in a few months, Sofia, who was expecting a child, was sent to Warsaw by the party to do illegal work, where she was arrested. Dzerzhinsky's first and only son Jan was born in 1911 in the Serbia prison for women. Then Sofia was sentenced again to exile to eastern Siberia. But soon after, she ran away abroad with her son using forged papers. In emigration, she found out Dzerzhinsky was arrested again. He would only see his son for the first time in 8 years. In September 1912, after illegally returning to Warsaw, Felix Dzerzhinsky was arrested, and in April 1914, he was sentenced to 3 years of penal servitude. He served his sentence at the Oriol prison, which was infamous for particularly cruel conditions, which would lead to illnesses en masse and high mortality and suicide rates among the convicts. Dzerzhinsky states this in a letter. What you have found out about our living conditions is all true. They are simply unbearable. Owing to them, every day someone gets brought out of here in a casket. Out of our category political prisoners, 5 people have died over the last 6 weeks, all of them from consumption. These years were the darkest period of Dzerzhinsky's life. Almost all of the time he was wearing shackles, in solitary cells, or in barracks overcrowded with people dying of typhus and tuberculosis. Scars from the shackles on his ankles would stay with him for his entire life. In 1916, Felix was sentenced to 6 more years of penal labor, which he served in Butyrskaya prison in Moscow. All in all, he spent 11 years in penal colonies, prisons, and exile. And it was exactly this fact that forged Felix's character, which is why he was rightfully given the name of Iron Felix. After the February Revolution of 1917, the workers came to free Dzerzhinsky. The one who walked out of that prison was the same resilient man they knew, and they were ready to follow him. By that time, the Russian Empire had already gotten involved in World War I. There were anti-war protests all over it, strikes, and bread riots. Dzerzhinsky now handled propaganda in army regiments. He changed his prison uniform to a soldier's shirt and a trench coat. The outfit seemed comfortable to him, and it became part of his image. In August, Felix Dzerzhinsky decided for good he would follow Lenin. In Petrograd, at the Sami Legal 6th Congress of Bolshevist Party, he was elected to the Central Committee. Dzerzhinsky became an important figure of the Bolshevist military wing.
The Central Executive Committee is the highest governing body of the party in between the Congresses. The Central Executive Committee governed over all party activities and local party bodies. It handled staff policy. The committee guided the work of key governmental and social organizations, created various political bodies, departments, and enterprises, appointed editorial staffs of key newspapers and journals, allocated budget funds. Over the course of various periods of its existence in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, the Communist Party had several names. 1898 to 1917, Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, RSDRP. 1917 to 1918, Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, Bolshevist. 1918 to 1925, Russian Communist Party, Bolshevist, RKP. 1925 to 1952, All Soviet Communist Party, Bolshevist, VKP. 1952 to 1991, Communist Party of the Soviet Union, KPSS.
The Bolshevist uprising first started in Petrograd on the night of October 24, 1917. Felix Dzerzhinsky was tasked with coordinating the captures of bridges, the telegraph, the power station, and other critically important objects. Soon, the news of a new government would spread to every Russian city via telegraph. Meanwhile, the country was plunging into chaos. From Dzerzhinsky's memoirs, it was a time when we took position in every possible ministry to find nothing but empty boxes and locked cabinets without keys. None of the functionaries of the key offices were willing to recognize Soviet power. Our departments were swamped with opportunists who wanted to line their pockets and fix their shady deals. And at the same time, in Petrograd and other cities, counter-revolutionary organizations were being created. On the night of December 4th, in Petrograd alone, there were recorded 69 pogroms and 611 various criminal offenses. There was a lack of fuel. The transport system was almost completely idle. Petrograd, RSFSR, 1917. To handle the situation in the country, it was decided to create an organization to fight internal counter-revolution, sabotage, and black markets. It was named the AllRussian Extraordinary Commission, and Felix Dzerzhinsky was appointed its chairman, having already proved himself to be a good leader. On December 10th, 1917, the Izvestia newspaper announced the creation of the AllRussian Extraordinary Commission, stating its address, Petrograd, 2 Gorokayova Street, and its visiting hours. The chairman of the commission received just 30 men at his disposal, selecting among the trusted Bolsheviks. They had no knowledge or skills in investigating, but they did have experience with underground work. In those days, the Commission's main task was fighting crime, including preventative actions. It was authorized to confiscate property, evict people out of their houses and apartments, deprive them of food stamps. Death by firing squad was not used by the Commission at the time, since at first, the Bolsheviks had banned capital punishment in Russia. World War I was still going on, and German forces were getting close to Petrograd. Anti-Bolshevik groups were working behind the Russian army lines. On January 1st, 1918, an attempt on Vladimir Lenin's life had taken place. With the situation that had formed, the Soviet government decided to transfer the capital to the safer city of Moscow and issued an edict called Socialist Motherland in Danger. It was this edict that reinstated capital punishment in the country. It is usually agreed upon that it happened at the suggestion of Dzerzhinsky himself, who asserted that the right to execute is extremely important for the Commission, even if its sword may accidentally fall upon innocent heads. The first sentence to execution by firing squad was passed by the Commission on February 24, 1918. The persons convicted by it were a robber calling himself Prince Eboli and his associate Briddy. They would rob apartments and government institutions, and they had stolen a considerable amount of jewelry from the Winter Palace. From February to June of 1918, 50 people were shot at the behest of the Extraordinary Commission. Meanwhile, the political situation became incredibly tense as a result of a terrorist attack with Dzerzhinsky at its center. The Bolsheviks were getting ready to sign a separate peace treaty with Germany and take Russia out of the war. The Socialist Revolutionary Party opposed it vehemently. The SRs, who had become Lenin's allies after the revolution, decided to mount an uprising in the summer of 1918.
The Socialist Revolutionary Party is a revolutionary political party of the Russian Empire, later the Russian Republic, and RSFSR. Shortly after the February Revolution of 1917, the SRs turned into a massive political power, its numbers reaching 1 million members. Its representatives held several key positions in the government. The population found its ideas of democratic socialism and a peaceful transition to it attractive. But despite all this, the SRs didn't manage to hold on to their power.
To sabotage the peace treaty with Germany, the SRs organized the assassination of the German ambassador in Moscow, Wilhelm von Mirbach. The main actor of the assassination was an 18-year-old SR, Yakov Blumkin, who served under Dzerzhinsky in the Extraordinary Commission, Moscow, RSFSR, June 6, 1918. To set up the assassination, Blumkin used papers with forged Dzerzhinsky's signatures. The one who forged it was the first deputy of the chairman of the commission, Vyacheslav Alexandrovich. Alexandrovich and Blumkin came into Dzerzhinsky's office together, took the stamp from the safe, and stamped the papers. The conspirators discussed the details and were already getting ready to leave when Alexandrovich accidentally looked behind the privacy screen in the corner. It is hard to imagine what he felt when he saw Dzerzhinsky sleeping behind it. Iron Felix, being remarkably hardworking, had a rest right at his workplace. As it happened, he literally slept through the terrorist attack that complicated the political situation and almost proved fatal for Dzerzhinsky himself. On July 6, 1918, Blumkin and his assistant Andreev arrived to the German embassy on Denesny Alley in Moscow. After showing their false papers, they came in to see Mirbach. When already talking to the ambassador, Blumkin took out his revolver and opened fire. He shot almost all of the rounds. but he was so nervous he didn't land a single shot. Murbach ran to the adjoining room. Andreev threw a bomb at the ambassador's feet, but it did not explode. Then Andreev punched Murbach and he fell down. Blumkin grabbed the bomb and threw it at the ambassador again, and the explosion sounded. Having left their hats and revolver, the papers and a briefcase with an extra bomb on the table, the terrorists escaped through a window and hid inside a Morozov mansion on Trek-Sviatosletsky Alley. This is where the most numerous extraordinary commission squad was, under the command of Popov, an SR. Dzerzhinsky arrived to arrest Blumkin and Andreev, but he was disarmed and arrested by his own subordinates. Arrests of other Bolsheviks started as well. The SR uprising was barely suppressed, and Dzerzhinsky himself was dismissed from his position as the commission chairman until judgment was passed. The investigators were trying to find out whether he took part in the plot himself, since he had a motive. Just like the SRs, Dzerzhinsky had spoken out against signing the peace treaty, since according to its conditions, Russia would lose the Polish lands that were his homeland. Felix said again and again that he didn't know anything about the upcoming plot against Murbach, and his signature had been forged. They believed him and reinstated him in his job. From March 1919 to July 1923, he simultaneously became Minister of the Interior and Chairman of the Military Council of the Extra-Departmental Police Force. Apart from that, Dzerzhinsky headed the Extraordinary Commission. He would go to sleep at 3 to 4 in the morning, and he would be at his desk at 9 a.m. On February 20th, Dzerzhinsky was also appointed chairman of the People's Commissariat for Labor. His health, damaged in prisons and penal colonies, was getting worse. Tuberculosis and heart problems. But there was no time to rest. There was still a civil war in the country. The population had split up into two rival movements, the Reds and the Whites. The situation was worsened by intervention from foreign powers. In the summer of 1918, English troops landed in Arkhangelsk and Baku. Vladivostok was occupied by Japanese and French regiments. On Soviet heartland, foreign intelligence operatives became active. One of them was Sidney Riley.
Sidney Riley was a British spy. His call sign was 007, and he was one of the prototypes for James Bond. He was fluent in 6 languages, including Russian. He worked in Russia starting from late 1917. Among other things, Riley had free passage into the Kremlin, granted by legitimate Extraordinary Commission papers issued to a Sidney Rylinsky.
On August 28, 1918, a grand operation was supposed to take place, headed by Sidney Riley. The location was the Bolshoi Theater, where a Central Committee session would take place. With 2 million rubles, Riley bribed the head of the Kremlin Guard detail, Latvian rifleman, Commander Eduard Burzin. On the day in question, he was supposed to have everybody loyal to him help him shoot every committee member present, including Lenin. The same night, 60,000 Tsarist officers were supposed to rise up. Riley handed Burzin another 1 million rubles for the expenses. He never as much as suspected that Burzin was Dzerzhinsky's agent. Sidney Riley's operation failed. He escaped abroad but was sentenced to execution in absence. The sentence was only carried out 7 years later when Dzerzhinsky's people managed to lure Riley to Moscow once again. The plot was liquidated on time, but yet another attempt on Lenin's life happened anyway. On August 30th, 1918, Fanny Kaplan wounded him in the courtyard of the Mikkelsen factory. The same day in Petrograd, an SR named Leonid Kanegeiser killed the chairman of the Petrograd Extraordinary Commission, Moisey Uritsky. Anti-Bolshevik riots became more frequent, often accompanied by armed conflict. Bolsheviks announced that the Soviet Republic was a military camp. So-called Red Terror began.
Red Terror was a complex of punitive measures carried out by the Bolsheviks during the Civil War against its class enemies. Nobles, landlords, officers, priests, kulaks, Cossacks, and also all counter-revolutionaries. Red Terror was a reaction to White Terror, the extreme form of the repressive policies of anti-Bolshevik forces.
Moscow, 1918. Dzerzhinsky's letter to his wife reads, I was brought to the front lines, and my will is to fight and look with my eyes wide open upon the danger of this severe situation, and to be ruthless myself. Physically, I am tired, but I hold on with my guts. I almost don't leave my office. I work here, and in the corner, behind the screen, is my bed. I have been in Moscow for several months. My address is 11 Lubyanka. In 1918, the Commission became the main force of Red Terror. At the end of 1917, it counted only 30 employees, and now 30,000 people served there. There were 40 governorate and 365 county commissions. In the areas where martial law was declared, the Chekists were authorized to arrest people indefinitely without proving their guilt, and to shoot the enemies of the revolution on the spot without passing the case to court. The commission functionaries took former landlords, merchants, bankers, Tsarist army officers, and relatives of White Guard members hostage. For this purpose, the small concentration camps were created. And yet, Dzerzhinsky spoke out against torture and senseless destruction of the enemy, whether real or imagined. There were cases when, on his orders, after beating a suspect, a commission employee would be fired, imprisoned, and in case of aggravating circumstances, shot to death. But it was precisely Dzerzhinsky who was called the Red Butcher. Iron Felix wasn't bothered by it since it was the foreign press that wrote that. It even benefited the revolution, since now people trembled in fear of its punishing sword. Dzerzhinsky wrote to his sister Aldona, "For many, there is no name scarier than mine." At the height of Red Terror, following persistent advice from Yakov Sverdlov and Vladimir Lenin, Dzerzhinsky went to meet his family. It had been 8 years since he was separated from his wife. He never got to see his son. It was an uneasy time for a vacation, but in October, the Red Army was already attacking. Many plots had been uncovered. Dzerzhinsky shaved off his beard and mustache, shaved his head, dressed like he was foreign, and got into the train with papers issued to a Felix Domansky. His family was living in emigration in Switzerland. It was only from the rare letters from his wife that he knew how Jan was growing up. But seeing him, embracing him, meeting him was something Dzerzhinsky only managed to do now. This trip to Switzerland in the middle of the Civil War still causes much discussion among historians. He probably had some other assignment from Lenin, but it's hard to imagine he would be let out abroad during such harsh times just to meet his family. But as to what that assignment was, it's still a mystery. Bern, Switzerland, 1919. It was only in the spring of 1919 that Sophia and her son moved to Moscow. The Dzerzhinskys moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in the Kremlin. Jan went to school and Sophia started party work, having received a job at the People's Commissariat of Education. Dzerzhinsky would still see his family rarely. Having several jobs, he worked to exhaustion, and he was constantly on the road. He'd get sent to Minsk, Bialystok, Wilno, Kharkov. He would need to restore the coal industry, organize foodstuff supplies. June 13th, 1920. From a letter from Dzerzhinsky to his wife. And I am unhappy with myself. I can see and feel that I could give more than what I am giving. I could, but Perhaps I am too mentally exhausted. I can't concentrate and get a grip to make myself spare my energy more, so it could possibly yield more with the least fatigue. Dzerzhinsky continued his work at the commission. After traveling the country, he realized the Red Terror that was originally aimed at fighting the enemy began killing simple folk as well. In 1920, in the Tambov Governorate, a rebel regiment was liquidated, where out of 11,000 dead, most were simple peasants. In 1921, after the Kronstadt uprising, over 2,000 people were shot. Dzerzhinsky could never come to terms with that. Out of a Dzerzhinsky speech at the 10th Congress of RKPB, "Comrades, you name me candidate to the Central Committee, possibly with a view that I go on working as commission chairman, but I do not want and most importantly cannot work there anymore. You know my hand has never shaken as I aimed the punishing sword at the heads of our class enemies. You know, my comrades, that I spared no effort in the revolutionary struggle in fighting for better lives for workers and peasants. And now, I have to repress them too. But I cannot. Hear me, I cannot. I ask you to withdraw my candidacy." Dzerzhinsky's request was denied. Someone had to do the job. And it was precisely the revolutionary fanatic Iron Felix who had the qualities of a born Chekist, a cold head and a hot heart. Between 1921 and 1929, the commission arrested 1 million people. Only 20% of them were convicted. Dzerzhinsky still tried to not be a butcher in his work. The head of the commission was worried about the Chekists' health. Dzerzhinsky realized how important sports were for commission men as well. So, on a personal initiative from Felix Dzerzhinsky in 1923, the famous sports club Dynamo was founded specifically to the internal affairs workers. Moscow, RSFSR, 1920. Apart from that, Dzerzhinsky occupied himself with the street children. After World War I and the Civil War, there were about 5 million in the country. Memoirs of Sergei Tikhomalov, Dzerzhinsky's personal driver. Once we were driving down Myasnitskaya Street, which was being asphalted. It was boiled in the streets in special cauldrons, and at night, street children would sleep in them. Dzerzhinsky asked me to stop the car next to one of them. He walked up to the bowl and took the kids out of there. Some of them got scared and ran. Dzerzhinsky struck up a conversation with the rest and took them into our car. We went to the commission building on Lubyanka. He walked the kids into his office, fed them, and talked them into going to live at an orphanage. In January 1921, Dzerzhinsky proposed to the People's Commissary of Education, Anatoly Lunacharsky, to create a committee for bettering children's lives. It soon started working, and every Chekist would donate 10% of his monthly paycheck towards maintenance of the orphanages. By 1924, the country already had over 280 orphanages, 420 labor communes, and 880 playgrounds. Over 90,000 teenagers were educated in 927 factory schools. The famous FED photo camera, a copy of the German Leica II, was manufactured by the Kharkov Labor Commune. The idea of creating such communes came to the famous pedagogue Anton Makarenko, and Dzerzhinsky actively assisted its realization. The abbreviation FED itself stands for Felix Edmundovich Dzerzhinsky. Dzerzhinsky received many letters from commune members and foster children in 1925 and 1926. There were some framed photos at his work desk next to a picture of his son Jan. In just 7 years, the number of street children in the USSR went down from 5 million to 200,000. Working with children seems like the best way to prevent counter-revolution and terror to Dzerzhinsky. April 25th, 1920, First Marshal of Poland, Józef Pilsudski starts his Kiev Offensive. Poland was supported by Western powers and Pilsudski seriously hoped to restore the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in its historical borders. He managed to get together an army of 700,000 soldiers. Felix Dzerzhinsky would always empathize that he was Bolshevik first and not a Pole. But the fate of his homeland bothered him. He saw the future of Poland as being part of the USSR. At the end of July, Dzerzhinsky went to Wilno and then to Białystok, a big industrial city in northern Poland, which had already been taken by the Red Army. Here, the prototype for a future government of socialist Poland was created, the Polish Revolutionary Committee. They eagerly took to composing manifestos to address Poles with. Dzerzhinsky was being exceptionally active. In the first 2 weeks of August, he spoke at rallies, organized the supply of foodstuffs and industrial goods, demanded the Central Committee send communist Poles. And it was all in vain. The Polish people didn't accept the government created by Soviet Russia. Pilsudski's army gradually pushed the Red Army out of all Polish cities, and in March 1921, the Communists were forced to sign an unfavorable peace treaty that ceded large parts of Ukraine and Belarus to Poland. This is how the fight between two revolutionary movements ended in the Polish kingdom. Social Democrat Dzerzhinsky lost Poland to the nationalist Pilsudski. It became a personal tragedy for Iron Felix. On April 14, 1921, Dzerzhinsky got a new appointment. While functioning as Extraordinary Commission Chairman, he became the People's Commissary for Railways. Dzerzhinsky himself described the situation like this: "Our railroads are one single big horror. Thievery in train cars, thievery in ticket offices, thievery in warehouses, thievery in work contracts, thievery in stockpiles." It was no surprise that the Central Committee decided that the head of the Extraordinary Commission was to become head of transport. The railroads of the country were in terrible condition. In the Civil War, 2,000 verts of railways, 80% of the rail system, 4,322 bridges were out of commission. Plus, 400 workshops and depots, 60% of the locomotives, and 1/3 of the train cars were inoperable as well. On an assignment from Dzerzhinsky, a group of Chekists came to see the Tsarist railway minister Ivan Borisov. They weren't there to arrest him, but to coax him. They brought Borisov food, wood, and most importantly, proposed that he get back to work as assistant to Commissar for Railways, Felix Dzerzhinsky. And the next day, Borisov started the inventory of the railway. Dzerzhinsky had one more problem to solve: railroad crime. Entire special trains got stolen from freight stations with forged waybills. The commission began its investigation. Soon, secret workshops manufacturing fake stamps were uncovered in Moscow. Among the confiscated evidence, a brand new stamp with Dzerzhinsky's own signature was found. At the end of 1921, Lenin decided that it was time to get rid of the Extraordinary Commission. The country needed foreign investment, and Westerners were afraid to invest into a country that had such a fearsome organization. That's why instead of it, in February 1922, State Political Directorate, or GPU, was created. It was headed by Felix Dzerzhinsky. The structure of the new department was borrowed from the commission. The objective of the new service wasn't action behind White Army lines, but it was meticulous and inconspicuous work with the opposition inside of the country. Unlike the commission, the GPU didn't have unlimited authority. According to the law, it was to become a preliminary investigative agency under the directive of the prosecution. However, many people still refer to GPU workers as Chekists. The word GPU-shnik never became popular, and on September 2nd, 1922, the Anti-Corruption Committee was formed. Eliminating corruption was Felix Dzerzhinsky's job as well. In 1922, the number of bribery convictions reached 3,254 in 49 governorates alone, which was twice the number of those convicted for crimes against the state. Bribery meant capital punishment. Meanwhile, the country was being overtaken by famine. 34 governorates were hit with drought. There wasn't enough bread to feed the hungry or enough seeds to sow the fields. Considerable foodstuff reserves were held in Siberia, 23 million pounds of bread and 1.5 million pounds of meat. To send the mountain of food to the hungry central regions, it was necessary to send 228 train cars every day, but the railway lacked fuel and workforce. Dzerzhinsky left for Siberia. He spent over 50 days there. The railway workers who hadn't been paid in 3 months got their pay. And a system of bonuses was introduced for train engineers for saving coal and for working without any accidents. By March 1922, trains carrying food would go in one direction, east to west, day and night. On January 21st, 1924, Lenin died. Dzerzhinsky was entrusted with organizing his funeral. According to one version, it was the head of the now GPU who came up with embalming the leader and constructing the mausoleum. And inside the party, power struggles began. Dzerzhinsky asked to be let go from the position of railway commissary to become the head of the Supreme Soviet of the national economy. In essence, he headed the entire economy of the USSR, and Dzerzhinsky turned out to be very pragmatic. He stood for the well-being of the peasants. Apart from that, he was a proponent of developing small-scale private trade, which would allow to lower the prices of food and household goods. It was Dzerzhinsky who was the first to occupy himself with the question of developing the metallurgical complex of the country and industrializing the entirety of the Soviet economy. By 1924, the USSR had overcome an agricultural, fuel, and transport crisis. Gross output of major industries doubled. A monetary reform took place. The ruble became a free currency and it cost about $6 at the international market. Soviet economy managed to achieve such results thanks to the new economic policy, or NEP, which Dzerzhinsky spent a lot of effort in introducing. However, iron and steel smelting were 7% and 17% their pre-revolutionary level. A severe shortage of metal products could be felt in the country, even though throughout 1924 and 1925, the industry gross products rose 62%. Compared to the preceding year, villagers were still too poor to buy anything from the city. There was a sales crisis of industrial goods, and factories had no money to develop. Meanwhile, Dzerzhinsky started having health problems more often. The years he'd spent in prison and at the colonies showed. On March 5th, 1925, the Politburo discussed the question of Dzerzhinsky's health. The decision was to get together a medical committee. According to its recommendations, Dzerzhinsky was only allowed to work 6 hours a day if there was any urgent state business. He was forbidden from speaking at the party meetings, and he was prescribed 2 days' rest outside of Moscow if possible. In late 1925, Dzerzhinsky had a major heart attack. His doctor, Ion Baumholz, advised him to cut his workday to 4 hours. Dzerzhinsky adamantly rejected the doctor's demands despite his being tortured by wheezing and by coughing fits. Before speaking at the July assembly of the committee in 1926, Dzerzhinsky worked all night on his speech about the country's economic situation. The clerks noted his depression and sickly look, but after lunch, he still left for the assembly. Memoirs of Bohumir Smeral, the founder of the Czechoslovak Communist Party. I was sitting across from him when he was speaking at the stand. He would often press his left hand to his heart, then he started pressing both of his hands against his heart. and you might have mistaken it for a rhetorical gesture, but now we know that he gave his last big speech despite great physical suffering. After the speech, Dzerzhinsky felt bad. Others helped him to get out of the hall and lay him down on a sofa. Dr. Woolman, who was called, gave him a camphor shot and some lily-of-the-valley drops. They never had the time to help him with anything else. Abram Belenki, special department head of OGPU Collegium, described Iron Felix's last minutes like this. When the first fit of weakness had passed, he got up and walked down the hall, wavering. When asked to give his briefcase, he said, "I can carry it myself." When he'd gotten up to his apartment, he walked up to his bed and, refusing help again, said incredibly quiet, "I can." And he fell down instantly. He wasn't even 50 at the time of his death. He died on July 20th, 1926, age 48. His cause of death was cardioplegia. His ideas, his ideals, and his cause were what he stayed fanatically loyal to until the very end. From Dzerzhinsky's letters, he wrote, "Man, like all living things, is in constant motion. Something dies in him all the time and is born again. His every moment is a new life, revealing latent energy, abilities. Life is in flux, and that is its beauty."